In this video, I will showcase how to set up Windows Workspaces on Kasm. Kasm supports both container-based sessions and server-based sessions such as Windows by utilizing the RDP protocol. Kasm currently supports 5 architectures with Windows: fixed Windows servers, auto-scaled Windows servers, Microsoft RDS, Azure Virtual Desktops, and Microsoft Windows 365. More details about each architecture is covered in our docs. In order to utilize the Windows capabilities of Kasm, you need to create a server record on Kasm and connect it to your Windows VM by installing the Kasm Desktop Service. The Kasm Desktop Service acts as a lightweight agent on your Windows VM, allowing Kasm Workspaces to connect to it and manage your VM as necessary. In this demo, I'm using Harvester as my hypervisor, and you can see I already have a Windows Server 2022 VM provisioned on it. I am now going to connect this VM to my Kasm and use it from there. For more clarity, my Kasm deployment is running on an Ubuntu-based VM on vSphere, and my Windows VM is running on Harvester. It doesn't matter what hypervisor you're using to host your Kasm or your Windows VM. All that matters is that Kasm needs to be able to talk to the Windows VM for the connection to be successful. The first thing I'm going to do is go back to my Kasm deployment, go to the admin panel, and then I'm going to create a server record. To do that, go to Infrastructure, go to Servers, and click Add. I'm going to name it as Windows Harvester since it's on my Harvester backend. I'm going to choose the default deployment zone, and I don't have a pool at the moment, so I'm not going to choose any pool. I'm also going to install the Kasm Desktop Service, so I'll enable this. And basically, by installing the Kasm Desktop Service, you get to use additional capabilities on your Windows VMs. For example, you can upload files to the remote desktop, you can download files from the remote desktop, you can see a preview screenshot of your remote desktop in Kasm Workspaces dashboard, and you can also run Powershell scripts automatically whenever your Windows session either starts or ends. And this way you can set up your Windows desktop for a user as they log in. For example, you can have some files downloaded when the session starts and then have those files deleted when that session ends. You can also apply registry settings automatically when a session starts or ends, and you can also make use of Kasm managed Windows local users, which we will talk about in a different video. But basically, Kasm Desktop Service will be able to create local Windows accounts on your behalf whenever a session is created. You'll also be able to do file mapping to your Windows sessions, and you can also support multiple concurrent users on the same Windows system. So all of these are made possible with the Kasm Desktop Service. So I'm going to go back to my Kasm Workspaces and make sure Kasm Desktop Service installed is enabled, and we're going to install the Kasm Desktop Service in some time on the Windows VM. The connection type is going to be RDP. The IP or hostname is going to be the IP or hostname of the Windows VM. In my case, it is 192.168.100.191. The connection port is going to be 3389, which is the default RDP port, and you can choose different options for the connection credential type. You have static credentials, prompt user, dynamic user accounts, SSO user accounts, or even authenticate with Smartcard. Now, for this demo, I'm going to choose static credentials, but we will make a different dedicated video talking about the other supported authentication methods. So check out the description for a link to that video. So I'm going to select static credentials here, and then I also need to type in my username and password for the Windows machine. So I'll type it in. You also get to choose the maximum number of simultaneous Kasm sessions allowed per Windows server. For this demo, I'll just set this to 2. And that's it. I'll go ahead and click on Save, and a server record has now been created. And you can see the status of this server is still in starting state, and we can only use this server when it comes to the running state. In order for it to come to the running state, we need to install the Kasm Desktop Service on the target Windows VM and then connect the Kasm Desktop Service back to the Kasm deployment. So as you can see, I've already RDP'd into my Windows VM. It's important to enable RDP on your Windows VM so that Kasm can talk to your Windows VM via the RDP protocol. So if you don't have RDP enabled yet, you can enable it by going to your Start menu and search for Remote Desktop Settings. And over here, you can go ahead and enable remote desktop. So this is a required step. Obviously, you need to have remote desktop enabled on your Windows VM before continuing with the rest of the process. And over here, I'm going to go ahead and install the Kasm Desktop Service. So let me open up my browser here and I'll search for Kasm Desktop Service. Here is our docs page where we offer download links for the Kasm Desktop Service. Since I'm using the Kasm version 1.17, I'm going to download this file right here. And I'm going to open the installer once the download is done. Once the install is done, you can see it prompts you for some details like the host name of your Kasm API servers and the registration token of your server. Before I go ahead and fill in these details, it's advised to check the connection from your Windows VM to your Kasm deployment, as well as from your Kasm deployment to your Windows VM to make sure that all the necessary firewall rules are open and that the connections are being made. So first, let me check the connection from my Windows VM to my Kasm deployment. In order to do that, I'll go ahead and open up a command prompt window. And over here, I'll type in a curl command to try and make a connection to my Kasm deployment. So as you can see, the connection is successful, which means the Windows VM is able to connect to my Kasm deployment on port 443, which is HTTPS. And that's a requirement. Your Windows VM should have the ability to make an outbound connection to your Kasm deployment on port 443. Alright, now let's check the connection from the Kasm deployment to the Windows VM. In order to do that, I have SSH'd into my Kasm server. And over here, I'm going to type in two netcat commands to validate the connection. The first netcat command is going to be something like this. I'm going to type in the IP address of my Windows machine, which is 192.168.100.191. And the first port I'm going to test is going to be 3389 because that's the RDP port, and this needs to be open on the Windows machine so that Kasm can make RDP connections to your Windows machine. So I'm going to go ahead and run this command, and as you can see, it says the connection has been succeeded. That means the port 3389 is open and it's reachable. If you see that the connection has failed, it means that the port 3389 is not reachable on the Windows machine, probably because of a firewall rule. So you got to open the inbound port 3389 because that's required for Kasm to make RDP connections to your Windows machine. The second netcat command I'm going to run is going to be the same, except the port is going to change to 4902. So the port 4902 is what Kasm uses to talk with the Kasm Desktop Service that's installed on your Windows VM. So this port also needs to be open. So let me hit enter. You can see the connection is not resolving at the moment, and that is because we have still not registered our Kasm Desktop Service with our Kasm deployment. So let me go ahead and do that first. So I'm going to first type in the IP or fully qualified domain name of my Kasm deployment, which is going to be teja.oci.dev.kasmweb.net. And the port is going to be 443, which is the default port. And finally, the registration token, you can find it in your Kasm deployment. So go back to your Kasm deployment, go to servers, and then edit the server that you just created. And over here, you can find your registration token. Just copy it and paste it into this field and click OK. And as you can see, it says registration is successful. So if I go back to my SSH session and try to run the same netcat command again to test the connection on port 4902, you can see the connection has now been succeeded, which means Kasm is able to talk with the Kasm Desktop Service process on your Windows VM on port 4902. Once again, if you see that this connection has failed, it means you have to allow the inbound port 4902 on your firewall rules that's configured with your Windows machine. Otherwise, Kasm will not be able to talk to the Kasm Desktop Service. Alright, so I'll go back, close this installer, I'll go back to my Kasm Workspaces, go to infrastructure and then servers again. And then you can see the status of this server has now changed to running state, which means it is now in the active state and it can now be used. If you're facing any issues like with the connection between the Kasm Desktop Service and your Kasm deployment or anything like that, it would probably be helpful to have a look at the logs. And to look at the logs, you can go back to your Windows machine, you can open your File Explorer, go to this PC, local disk C, program files, and then there is a folder named Kasm. If you go into it, you can see a logs file and you can see the logs that are generated by the Kasm Desktop Service and have a look at what's actually happening, and this would be very useful if you encounter any issue. Similarly, you can also find another folder called scripts. If you go into it, here you can find different folders. So you can place your PowerShell scripts inside any of these folders based on when you want the script to be executed. For example, if you place a PowerShell script in this folder that's named as session_end, it means that PowerShell script will be executed whenever a session ends. Same way, if you place it in session start, the PowerShell script will be executed when the session starts. And you can also apply registry files by placing your registry files inside this folder called registry, and all the registry files that you place in here will be applied automatically by the Kasm Desktop Service. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the Kasm Desktop Service. Same way, if you go to the built-in folder, you can find a lot of pre-installed scripts. For example, a script to create a local account, to load persistent profile, etc., etc. And these scripts are automatically executed by the Kasm Desktop Service based on the settings that you configured on your Kasm deployment. Alright, now that I have created a server record and also installed the Kasm Desktop Service and linked them both, the server is in the running state. Let me go ahead and now create a Windows Workspace to utilize this server. To do that, I'll go to my Kasm admin panel once again, go to Workspaces and then Workspaces again. You can see I have two workspaces at the moment. Both of them are container-based workspaces. One is Chrome and one is Firefox. But I'm going to create a new Windows-based workspace. To do that, I'll go ahead and click on Add Workspace. The workspace type is going to be server because I'm going to utilize the server that I just created. I'll set the friendly name to Windows Desktop because I want to give a desktop experience with this workspace. I'll just copy the same thing into description. You can also set a thumbnail by providing a URL here. And then I'll choose the server that I just created, which is the Windows Harvester server. And then for the RDP client options, you can either choose RDP local client or web native client, or give the ability to the user to choose one of these two options when they are launching the session. So I'll just select user selectable. And for this workspace, I'm not going to enable RemoteApp. We will do that for the next workspace that we'll be creating. And basically that's it. I'll go ahead and click on save. And if I come back to Workspaces, you can see I now have a new workspace called Windows Desktop. So let me try and launch this workspace. So I'll click on it. And you can see I now have the option to either choose web native client or the RDP client. The web native client basically opens this Windows session directly in your web browser so that you can access your Windows session from your web browser. If you choose RDP client, it's going to open the Windows session in your local RDP client. Basically, it's going to download an RDP file and you can click on that RDP file, which opens the Windows session in your default RDP client. So let me demo the web native client first. So I'll choose that and click on launch session. And you can see I am now able to access my Windows session directly from my web browser using the Kasm's web native client. I can also use the control panel features that Kasm offers. For example, I can upload files to my Windows session. I can download files from my Windows session to my local machine. I can also do printer redirection where I can basically print a PDF file or something like that from my Windows session by utilizing the printer that I have connected to my local machine. So let me go ahead and try to download a file. So if I click on download, by default, the downloads and uploads use the user's downloads directory inside the Windows session. So if I go to my downloads directory here, you can see all the files that are listed here will also be shown when you click on this download button, and you can download these files. So whatever files exist in the user's download directory, you can download them using the control panel. You can just click on them and the download will begin automatically. Now, the same way you can also upload files. So if I click on upload, I can click on this empty box right here and that will open a file dialog box like this, and I can choose the file that I want to upload into my remote session. For example, let me upload this file right here. And as you can see, once the upload is done, you can see that file is uploaded into the user's download directory. Now, the reason why we use the user's download directory for placing the uploaded files is because Windows doesn't have an inbuilt uploads directory, but it does have a downloads directory for each user profile. And obviously you will also be able to share clipboard between your host and the session. And you can also control the sound, microphone, and also make your session full screen by clicking on this button. So I'm going to create another Windows workspace, and this time I'm going to make use of remote apps. In other words, I'm going to create a remote app workspace. So I'll go back to my Kasm admin panel, go back to workspaces, click on add workspace, select the workspace type as server. I'm going to create a Microsoft Excel remote app workspace. So I'll set the friendly name to Excel. Same thing for the description. And then for the server, I'll choose my server. The RDP client options, I'll set this to user selectable. And over here, I'll go ahead and enable remote app. I'll set the remote app friendly name to Microsoft Excel. And for the remote app program name or path, this needs to be set to the actual path of the remote app executable. So I'll go back to my Windows session here and I'll search for Excel. I already have Microsoft Office installed, so I also have Excel. So I'm going to right click on Excel, click on open file location. And this took me to a shortcut file. So I'll right click on the shortcut file again, click on open file location. And this is where the actual executable of Microsoft Excel exists. So I'm going to copy this path right here and paste it here. And also don't forget to actually specify the name of the executable, which is excel.exe, as you can see here. And that's it. You can also pass additional arguments to the remote app if you want. I'm not going to do that now. And I'll click on save. So if I go back to workspaces, you can see I now have an Excel workspace. So let me delete the existing Windows session I have and let me open the Excel workspace using the web native client. Click on launch session. And there you go. I am now able to access Excel as a remote app from my Kasm Workspaces. Same way you can create remote apps for different applications like PowerPoint, Outlook, Microsoft Edge, etc. etc. The process is similar. You just need the executable path of the remote app. Alright, now that I have showcased the web native client, let me now go ahead and give you a demo of the RDP local client. Now, in order to make use of the RDP local client, your Kasm deployment needs to have a valid trusted cert. In my case, as you can see, my Kasm deployment already has a valid certificate that's issued by Let's Encrypt. So you also need to have a valid certificate. And if you want to learn how to generate a certificate with Let's Encrypt and install it on your Kasm deployment, we will leave a link to our guide that explains you how to do that. Check the description for the link. So, point to be noted, self-signed certificates will not work to use the RDP local client. You need to have trusted valid certs. Alright, let me choose RDP client here and click on launch session. And as you can see, this downloads an RDP file to my machine. And I can now go ahead and open up this RDP file, and this initiates a connection to the Windows session from my local RDP client. By default, it's going to show you a warning like this that says the publisher of this remote connection cannot be identified. If you want to suppress this warning and you don't want to say it, you can go to your Kasm admin panel and then go to settings, global. Scroll down until you find RDP public signing certificate. So you can copy the SHA-1 thumbprint from here and then you can configure it in your group settings, or you can directly install the certificate on your machine using the cert manager. So I'll go ahead and download this certificate to my machine, and I'll now open certmanager.msc from my run menu. And over here, I'll go to trusted root certificate authorities and then import this certificate. Click next, and then browse the certificate that I just downloaded. Click next, and then click finish. So if I go back and open the same RDP file again, you can see I now no longer see the warning message. So if I click on connect, this is going to open up the connection to the Windows session from my default Windows RDP client. If you want to delete this session, you can simply close your RDP client and then go back to Kasm and just delete the session from here. When deploying inside an organization, you can configure the cert to be trusted automatically and the RDP file to be opened automatically by modifying your group policies on Windows. Check out our docs to learn how to do that. An easier way of auto-opening the RDP file without changing your group policies is by directly configuring your browser's settings. To do that, you can go to your downloads, right-click on the RDP file, and then select Always Open Files of this type. So now, whenever I go ahead and open a Windows session with the RDP local client and click on Launch Session, it's going to download the RDP file and it's automatically going to open it. So I can now just click on Connect. And I now have the Windows session opened in my local RDP client. It's also important to talk about how the connections work internally when you choose the RDP local client. So if you go to your admin panel and then go to Infrastructure and then Zones, and then edit the zones which you configured for your Windows server, which is default in my case. If you scroll down, you will find an option that says Enable RDP HTTPS Gateway. This is enabled by default and we recommend it to have it enabled. If you have this disabled, when you initiate a connection from your client, the connection goes to the Kasm's RDP gateway on port 3389, which is the default RDP port. If a firewall rule is blocking the port 3389 on your Kasm server, that means this connection would fail and you would not have the RDP access to your Windows VM. By having the RDP HTTPS gateway enabled, the connection from your client is first made to the RDP HTTPS gateway on port 443, which is the web-based HTTPS port and the most common port which firewalls usually allow. From there, the connection is internally carried over to the Kasm RDP gateway and finally reaches the destination Windows server. So even with the port 3389 restricted or closed on the Kasm server, the RDP connection will still be successful between your client and the target Windows VM. Now, you can actually go back to your zone settings on Kasm and you can disable the RDP HTTPS gateway and save the settings. So what happens now is when I open a Windows Workspace with the RDP client, it downloads the RDP file and opens it, and when I click on Connect, the connection is now directly made to the RDP gateway instead of the RDP HTTPS gateway. Another thing that I want to showcase is the ability to do Smartcard pass-through to your Windows sessions from Kasm. Now, if you make use of the web native client, the Smartcard pass-through only works if you are using a Chrome OS device. We're actively working to extend that feature to other operating systems, but currently, Smartcard pass-through only works for Chrome OS devices if you're using web native client. But if you're using the RDP local client, you can do Smartcard pass-through from other operating systems as well, like Windows and Mac OS. In this video, as you can see, I'm clearly using Windows to access my Kasm deployment, and let me demonstrate how to do Smartcard pass-through with the RDP local client. You do need to have one setting configured on Kasm to be able to do Smartcard pass-through. So go to your admin panel and then go to Access Management and then Groups. Select the group you want. I'll just select the All Users group, click on Edit, and then go to the Settings tab, click on Add Setting, and then search for a setting named Allow Kasm RDP Smartcard Pass-Through and set its value to True. Click on Submit. So now any user from the All Users group will be able to do Smartcard Pass-Through. So let me demonstrate the Smartcard Pass-Through on the RDP local client. I'm using this Windows machine to access my Kasm deployment, and this Windows machine already has a Smartcard attached to it. So let me go ahead and open up this Windows Desktop Workspace. I'm going to choose RDP Client. Click on Launch Session. There you go, it downloads an RDP file. Let me go ahead and open that file. Click on Connect. And the Windows session is now opened in the RDP client. In order to test whether the Smartcard pass-through is working, I'll just open my browser and I'll go to this website right here that allows me to test Smartcard pass-through. I'll click on Test Now, and you can see my Smartcard is detected here. So I'll just choose that, click on OK. And it now opens up a prompt like this that asks me for my Smartcard PIN. So let me type in my Smartcard PIN here. Click OK. And as you can see, the test is a success, which means the remote Windows session is able to detect my Smartcard. So that'll be all for this video. Thanks for watching. Check the description of this video to find the links to all the related documentation and other guides. I will see you in the next one.